दूसरा वाला लाइन से निकलूंगा ना, तो फिर ज़्यादा दूर दूर जाके फ़ोटो लेनी पड़ेगी।
Life is like the ocean. Waves will try to knock you down and push you back to where you started. But once you fight through them, the entire ocean is yours. A very good morning to one and all present here. I, Bhavya Singh,
and I, Aditya Bhatnagar,
welcome you all to the inaugural ceremony of the National Capacity Building Workshop of Law of the Sea and Admiralty Law, Maritime Trade, Technology and Security Concerns.
I would like to commence the ceremony by extending a warm welcome to Dr. Neeru Chadha, Judge, Maritime Tribunal, Admiral Sunil Lamba, Vice Admiral Pradeep Chauhan, Dr. Vijay Sakhuja, Captain Sarabjit Parmar, Ms. Carolina McHugh, Commander Nand Kumar Das, Commander Anand Kumar, Commander Saurabh Mahanti, Professor Sushil Goswami, and Honorable Dr. Justice Meena V. Gombar, Chairperson Gombar Education Foundation, Raffles University, Professor Dr. V.K. Kapoor, President and Professor Emeritus, Raffles University, Professor Dr. Madhumita Kothari, Dean School of Law, Raffles University.
This specialized workshop will be an exposition and analysis of the issues of law of the sea and maritime laws in the backdrop of maritime trade, maritime environment, technological underpinnings, and security issues which shape maritime affairs.
The workshop is of critical importance to law students, legal and maritime professions who would understand the enduring maritime linkages with national and international legal regimes, conventions and frameworks, particularly on issues of interpretation of law of the sea, legal regimes of maritime matters, issues of freedom of navigation and right of innocent passage and legitimate activities in the oceans.
We, the students of Raffles University, study here with the motto and values given by late Mr. Vinod Kumar Gombar, that I quote, "Be inspired, broaden your horizons, aim for excellence, and achieve all your dreams." I unquote.
Saraswati Namastubhyam Varadikama Rupini Vidya Arambam Karisyami Siddhir Bhavatu Me Sada. Salutations to Devi Saraswati, who is the giver of boons and fulfiller of wishes. O Devi, when I begin my studies, please bestow on me the capacity of right understanding always. With this, I would like to request Honorable Dr. Neeru Chadha, Admiral Sunil Lamba, Vice Admiral Pradeep Chauhan, Professor Dr. Bimal Patel, Honorable Dr. Justice Meena V. Gombar, and Dr. Vijay Sakhuja to commence the auspicious gathering by lighting of the lamp.
भूपेंद्र
He's taking a picture, Mr. Lamba. The other side also. एक एक लेना भाई, सबका अलग अलग भीड़ में। Please, Carolina. Come, you have to light the lamp as well. Come.
Sir and Dr. Sakuja left.
Please up करें. Please sir up करें. हमें नहीं.
Thank you. Thank you.
अरे यार कई सारे काम कई सारे काम है ना Then I do. Please. I'm on last. Will you please?
Up.
Yeah, yeah.
No, you just put some flowers. So this is our goddess of learning in India, and that is Mr. Gautam. आइए सर.
थोड़ा सा आगे करके Yeah.
Thank you so much. You can make a
I will bring my stuff short.
It is a privilege that we have amongst us Honorable Dr. Neeru Chadda, who is a judge of the International Tribunal of Maritime Law since October 2017. Prior to that, she served as the Chief Legal Advisor in the Ministry of External Affairs. She has also served as a legal advisor in the Permanent Mission of India to the United Nations. Dr. Chadda has represented the Government of India in various multilateral meetings and conferences in the United Nations and other international and regional organizations on a wide range of subjects. She has also represented India in numerous bilateral negotiations on various issues of international law. She served as the agent of the Government of India in its maritime delimitation dispute with Bangladesh, in the case concerning the Enrica Lexi incident with Italy, in the case pertaining to the obligations concerning negotiations relating to cessation of nuclear arms race and nuclear disarmament with Marshall Islands. She also served as a co-agent in the Kishan Ganga arbitration with Pakistan.
Honorable Dr. Justice Meena V. Gombar, a caring patron who has been the guiding light in our path to excellence. Ma'am is a former judge of the Rajasthan High Court and subsequently served as head of the Armed Forces Tribunal, Jaipur, Jodhpur from 2013 to 2016. Currently, she has been effectively working as the chairperson, Gombar Education Foundation, and looking after the functioning of Raffles University, Neemrana. Admiral Sunil Lamba, PVSM, AVSM, ADC, is a retired officer who served as the 23rd Chief of the Naval Staff of the Indian Navy. During his tenure, he also served as chairman of the Chief of Staff's Committee and honorary aide-de-camp to the President of India. The commands held by him includes Western Naval Command, Southern Naval Command, INS Mumbai, INS Ranvijay, INS Himgiri, INS Kakinda, and he has been honored with Param Vishisht Seva Medal and Ati Vishisht Seva Medal.
Vice Admiral Pradeep Chauhan is a former flag officer in the Indian Navy. He has also served as the commandant of the Indian Naval Academy. His previous postings was as Assistant Chief of Naval Staff, Foreign Corporation, Strategic Threats and Transformations. Vice Admiral Chauhan has been singularly privileged to hold command of the Indian Navy's frontline surface commandants. On 4 occasions, he has been instrumental in the contemplations and proving of tactics of war for the Indian Navy and has been the principal director in the Directorate of Naval Operations at Naval Headquarters, New Delhi. He has also been honored with Ati Vishesh Seva Award and Vishesh Seva Medal.
Professor Dr. Bimal Patel, who is the Director General of Raksha University and a member of the Law Commission. He was the former director of the GNLU. He is the member of National Security Advisory Board, Government of India. He has drafted various international, national and state level legislations, including the Antarctica Act of India, Deep Sea Mining Act of India, Temple Trust Bill, etc. Amongst his notable works are the State Practice of India and the Development of International Law, dynamic interplay between foreign policy and jurisprudence. Wing Commander and Indian Consul Mr. Rajendra Chaudhary. He served in the Indian Air Force for 23 years. Mr. Chaudhary was awarded by the President of India's Medal for his distinguished services. Sir is currently holding office as President, Overseas Friends of BJP, Ludhiana Chapter and Chairman International Foundation for Aviation and Development, Baltic Chapter, IFAD.
Professor Dr. V.K. Kapoor, President and Professor Emeritus, Raffles University. I would request all these dignitaries to kindly take their respective places upon the dais.
A big round of applause for our
Now I would like to request Honorable Dr. Justice Meena V. Gombar to felicitate Dr. Neeru Chadha.
Professor Dr. Madhumita Kothari to felicitate Admiral Sunil Lamba.
Dheeraj sir, HOD School of Law to felicitate Vice Admiral Pradeep Chauhan. So I request Meenakshi ma'am, Faculty School of Law to felicitate Vice Admiral Pradeep Chauhan.
Dheeraj Sir, HOD, School of Law, to felicitate Professor Dr. Vimal Patel.
Mukta ma'am, Faculty School of Law, to felicitate Wing Commander Rajendra Chaudhary. Now I request Monica ma'am, Faculty School of Law, to felicitate Honorable Dr. Justice Meena V. Gombar. Now I request Dr. Naresh Kumar to felicitate Professor Dr. V.K. Kapoor.
गाड़ी कितने बजे करें? वहाँ पे लिखा हुआ है इवनिंग। कितने बजे जाना चाहेंगे आप गाड़ी? 5 बजे गाड़ी लगवा दूँ? थैंक यू।
Small chair and great welcome makes a merry feast. So with this, I would like to invite Honorable Dr. Justice Meena V. Gombar, Chairperson, Gombar Education Foundation, to welcome this august gathering on this auspicious occasion.
A very good morning to everybody. Good morning, ma'am. Honorable Dr. Justice Neeru Chadha, Judge, International Tribunal for Law of the Sea, Hamburg, Germany. Honorable Admiral Sunil Lamba, Chairman, National Maritime Foundation, and former Chief of Naval Staff, Indian Navy. Honorable Professor Dr. Bimal N. Patel, presently Director General, Raksha Shakti University, and former Vice Chancellor of Gujarat National Law University, and member Advisory Security, National Security Advisory Board, as also member Law Commission of India, Government of India. Honorable Vice President, Honorable Vice Admiral Pradeep Chauhan, Director General, National Maritime Foundation. Honorable Speakers, Dr. Vijay Sakuja, Dr. Madhumita Kotari, Captain S.S. Parmar, Commander Nand Kumar Das, Commander Anand Kumar, Mr. Surya Narayan, and other esteemed guests on and off the dais. Professor Dr. V.K. Kapoor, the President, Raffles University, Neemrana. Dear participants, students, faculty members, and members of the media, electronic and print. Ladies and gentlemen, as chairperson of Gombar Education Foundation, I am truly delighted to welcome you all to this Temple of Learning. I call it a Temple of Learning, which is a dream project of my late husband, Shri Vinod Kumar Gombar. Coming from a very, very humble background, he became an accomplished Harvard graduate and was the heart and hands behind Burj Khalifa and Dubai Mall as Group CEO of MR Group. In order to give back to the society in the form of education, he founded the educational trust named Gomber Education Foundation, which is a sponsoring body of the Raffles University, which after his demise is being chaired by me. Raffles University is a multidisciplinary institution housing various schools such as schools of engineering, School of Technology, School of Business Management and Commerce, School of Pharmacy, School of Agriculture, School of Humanities and Social Sciences, School of Basic and Applied Sciences, and School of Law. It's indeed an honor to host the first ever capacity building workshop on law of the sea, admiralty law, maritime trade, technology, and security concerns by the Center for Maritime Studies of Raffles School of Law. Honestly speaking, while serving on the bench for almost 4 decades, in Rajasthan and Delhi, I did not have any occasion to deal with any matter pertaining to this domain of law. It's only after the launch of Sagarmala project of Government of India in July 2015 that led to the deep digging of the then provisions of the Admiralty law and other related laws of this domain, which ultimately culminated into the desire to do something in this area, in the area of maritime laws, and it further inspired me to conceive a Center for Maritime Studies in Raffles University. I discussed with few friends who had mixed reactions and surprise and encouragement, skepticism. Little more, going deeper, I found that maritime trade today is not from port to port, but from warehouse to ports. While on your way, when you people came from Delhi, you might or you might not have noticed that the internal container depot in Bawal is situated just 20 kilometers from here on your left side of the highway, which is hardly 20 kilometers. So the ICD are far off from the ports. They are in Haryana, Uttar Pradesh, Delhi, and many other places. This clearly indicates that the maritime trade is not from port to port, but from ICDs and warehouses to the ports. With all this background, I took the final call and decided to move forward. You will appreciate that the profession of a judge has always guided us to make decisions, take decisions, right or wrong. Resultantly, the Center for Maritime Studies came into being. So I'm very happy that we have recently opened it, and we have also signed an MOU with the National Maritime Foundation at New Delhi, and which is a think tank, and they have been working for a long time. Thank you so much for being with us, sir. This workshop is designed to provide a platform to familiarize with the complexities of the maritime medium and help the participants to understand and address legal issues concerning oceans and seas, which will drive the new era of international relations, economic development, strategic contestations, and ecology, environment complexities. The globalization of the world economy and its impact on global seaborne trade, energy imperatives, and increasing dependence on sea resources all point towards the growing importance of the sea. It is said that 21st century will be a maritime century. The oceans are a huge reservoir of resources that control the development and sustainability of all economies right across the globe. 85% of the trade is through the oceans. They are a huge source of revenue, particularly in the sectors of fisheries, aquaculture, ocean energy, seabed mining and mineral, marine tourism, shipping industry, port and infrastructure, etc. The oceans cover a large proportion of the Earth's surface and make up more than 95% of the biosphere. They provide much of the world's population with food and livelihood and are a significant means of transport in global trade. The seabed is also a major source of hydrocarbons, and exploration in this area is expanding. The sea also offers vast potential for renewable blue energy production from wind, from wave, tidal, thermal and biomass sources. The potential of the oceans to meet sustainable development needs is enormous, but only if the oceans can be maintained in and or restored to a healthy and productive state. The United Nations Sustainable Development Goal number 14 states, conserve and sustainably use the oceans, seas and marine resources for sustainable development. This marine-based economic development will reduce environmental risks and mitigate ecological challenges. As a result, the optimized and responsible resource utilization will enable to achieve balanced socio-economic development. Since we are debating the issue in the School of Law, for the benefit of my young students and participants, I would like to briefly touch upon as to what is the law of the sea and what is maritime law, and the important legislative provisions of the Admiralty Act 2017. Law of the sea is a body of international law governing the rights and duties of states in maritime environments. It concerns the matters such as navigational rights, sea mineral rights, and coastal waters jurisdictions. The maritime law is a distinct body of law which governs maritime questions and offences. It's a body of both domestic and private international law. Domestic law governing maritime activities and private international law governing the relationship between private entities which operate vessels on the oceans. It deals with matters including maritime commerce, maritime navigation, shipping sailors, and the transportation of passengers and goods by sea. Maritime law also covers many commercial activities, although land-based, or occurred wholly on land, which are maritime in character. If we look at the legislative provisions of the prevalent law today in our country, we find that the Admiralty Jurisdiction and Settlement of Maritime Claims Act 2017, which has been a much awaited legislation, has qualified the rules and practices relating to the enforcement of maritime claims and liens and arrests in India, as well as incorporated and codified the principles of international conventions into Indian law. The Act of 2017 has repealed the archaic laws which had been applicable in India, namely the Admiralty Codes Act 1840, Admiralty Codes Act 1861, the Colonial Codes of Admiralty Act 1890, Colonial Codes of Admiralty India Act 1891, and the provisions of the Letters Patent 1865 pertaining to the Admiralty jurisdiction of Bombay, Calcutta, and Madras High Courts. The Admiralty jurisdiction hitherto being vested in and exercised by the High Courts of Bombay, Madras, and Calcutta concurrently over vessels wherever they may be in the territorial waters of India, as also vested in and exercised by the High Courts of Andhra Pradesh, Gujarat, and Kerala over vessels in those states' waters, has, by the Admiralty Act of 2017, now been conferred upon the High Courts of all the coastal states in India, including Karnataka, Telangana, and Odisha. In addition to the earlier mentioned High Courts over vessels which are found within the state waters of the respective states, and consequently their High Courts. Accordingly, the concurrent jurisdiction being exercised in the earlier regime is a thing of the past, and it would be the concerned states' High Courts only within whose waters the vessels should be found when the suit is instituted, that will have jurisdiction irrespective of the place of residency or domicile of the owner. Resultantly, an Indian vessel can also now be arrested in India for enforcement or recovery of maritime claims. The Admiralty Act 2017 aligns Indian laws with the International Conventions for Arrest of Ships 1952 and the 1999, as well as the International Convention of Maritime Laws 1993, and provides for the adjudication of identified maritime claims, provisions of security for such claims, and the arrest of vessels, and so on. This act has brought about some much needed clarifications to the maritime law in India, albeit that many areas of the law still remain to be clarified and procedure still needs to be introduced and or refined. With this short introduction, I leave you here to discuss, debate, introspect, and review some of the selected maritime issues over the next 2 days and enlighten each other to close with a clear message of development of the maritime domain in India and for India. With this, I declare the workshop open and wish everyone a happy learning and sharing of knowledge on this platform of Raffles University. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for briefing us and updating us on Admiralty and Maritime Law. Keep showering your blessings upon us and being the leader that you are for all of us. Thank you, ma'am. Next, to address us all, I would like to welcome Admiral Sunil Lamba, PVSM, AVSM, ADC upon dais. The glory is in the name itself. A big round of applause for the guest of honor, Admiral Sunil Lamba.
Dr. Justice Neeru Chadha, Judge, International Tribunal Laws of the Sea at Hamburg. Dr. Justice Meena Gombar, Chairperson, Gombar Education Society. Dr. Bimal Patel, Vice Admiral Pradeep Chauhan, the Director General of the National Maritime Foundation. Dr. Kapoor, President, Raffles University. Speakers, distinguished guests, my students of Raffles Universities, ladies and gentlemen, a very good morning to all of you. It's indeed an honor to be here at Raffles University, a renowned and prestigious institute of learning, on the National Capacity Building Workshop. It also gives me immense pleasure to be amongst the students and professionals from diverse fields and specialization, to be able to interact with all of you and share some of my views. At the outset, I'd like to congratulate Raffles University for the painstaking effort in organizing this comprehensive workshop covering the laws of the sea and admiralty law, maritime trade, technology, and security concerns. The seas have a special place in our minds since time immemorial. Even before the first sailboats crisscrossed the seas, this has become more important in today's world because of its primary linkages to trade, security, strategic issues, and more importantly, civilization, growth, and well-being of nation states. Throughout history, nations have strived to exploit the benefits of the ocean and the seas in all its facets. Some nations, particularly the European, gained colonies with the help from the seas. In short, it would not be inappropriate to say that no nation can become a global power without exploiting the benefits of the sea. Our blue planet, the Earth, has a dominance of the maritime domain, with over 70% of the Earth's surface covered with water, with a very large percentage of the population, close to 80, living within 200 miles from the coast, and about 90% of world trade crisscrossing the oceans. India has been essentially a maritime nation, and the Indian seaboard has been a vortex of immense maritime activities going back millennia. You're all aware of the Indus Valley civilization, which existed in the western part of our country, dating back to 3300 BC. And today the oldest dry dock in the world at Lothal, which dates back to 220 BC, is there in India. The first navigation chart was produced by Indian mariners. From these ports, seafarers sailed to distant ports in the Middle East, in Mesopotamia, ancient Egypt, and the east coast of Africa. On the east coast of India, we had maritime or seafaring kingdoms of Kalingas, the Cholas, the Pandyas, and the Cheras, who sailed to the east and colonized part of Indonesia, Indochina, now Cambodia, Vietnam. So even today we have glimpses of Indian culture in these countries, like the island of Bali is predominantly Hindus. In the past, while the seas have been used for free commerce and the vast oceanic expanse held the key to this intercourse, the major powers dictated the terms on which a high seas could be used for navigation or otherwise. Subsequently, given the importance of the oceans and the seas to mankind and the interrelatedness of all aspects of maritime activity, led to international community to frame laws on the use of the sea. And this is the United Nations Convention on the Laws of the Seas, or UNCLOS, which set out the legal framework within which all activities of the oceans and seas must be carried out. The first two Laws of the Seas conferences yielded inconclusive results, unable to cope with the rapid advances of democratic thoughts, processes, and technologies. This gives rise to the UNCLOS 3 that emerged after a decade of intense discourse. It was at this time that the concept of freedom of the seas became an important issue of debate. On one hand, there were attempts to restrict the freedom of navigation to emerging rivalries, regimes, while on the other hand, there were calls to ensure that the freedom under generally agreed and widely accepted legal principles were adopted by the worldwide community of nations. It was during the UNCLOS 3 debates that it emerged that while the freedom of the sea would still be a relevant concept, this freedom could not be unlimited. Other than issues of environmental control and fisheries management, security is another imperative that has led to additional limitations on freedom of navigation. There are two aspects to security imperatives. The first is the coastal state's concern for security of its adjacent waters. The other aspect is the desire of major maritime powers to preserve the traditional freedom of seas to ensure the military mobility of their vessels at sea. But as it's evident from the proliferation of security initiatives, there is also an apparent conflicting objectives of increasing security enhancement powers of nations on the high seas. While globalization has been key to India's economic growth, the role of the sea has been equally important and often an unrealized aspect providing basic economic sustenance. With international trade proving to be an important component of process of globalization, the security parameters and concerns have gained primarily because seaborne commerce is open to vulnerabilities and requires protection. The threat and challenges in the Indian Ocean are as wide and varied as they come. Who could have imagined in the 21st century that we would be once again grappling with pirates, or that the major threats to maritime domain would emanate from asymmetric warfare and maritime terrorism? The other threats include armed trafficking, drug smuggling, human trafficking, and poaching, or IUU. The instabilities and tensions on land have the potential of overflowing into the maritime domain. The situation can be best described as fragile in certain parts of the ocean. All these aspects have considerable linkages to the freedom of the seas. The need to balance the freedom of navigation against growing asymmetric threats, mainly from non-state actors, is the consequence which has now evolved. As a state with considerable maritime capabilities, India's role is steadily increasing, especially in the Indian Ocean region, which has very different set of littoral nations with limited capabilities and maritime law awareness, despite their growing dependence on the sea. The United Nations Convention on the Law of the Seas, or UNCLOS 1982, deems that the Constitution of the Oceans provides a comprehensive legal regime for the use of the oceans and its resources, but continues to be ambiguous vis-a-vis the rights of utilization of resources in areas beyond national jurisdiction or areas beyond the territorial waters and the exclusive economic zones. There is not a singularly internationally legally binding treaty for governance of areas beyond national jurisdiction, and consequently the high seas, which covers 50% of all ocean spaces of the earth, continues to be one of the least protected areas on our planet. Over the past few decades, we have also been witnessing pollution of the ocean and contamination of marine or maritime habitats with an adverse impact of climate change on oceans. Studies have indicated that 80% of pollutants in the sea eliminate from land, and if the current rate of pollution continues, in a few decades we will have more plastics in the ocean than fish. The concept of blue economy, therefore, is emerging as a new paradigm which aims to optimize utilization of resources with minimum impact on environment and sustainable development of the ocean. In recent years, under the leadership of Honorable Prime Minister Shri Narendra Modi, there has been a series of initiatives for sustainable development in the maritime domain, including the quest to harness the blue economy. Honorable Prime Minister has linked the blue chakra or the wheel on a national flag to a potential to harness the blue economy. He's also outlined his vision for the Indian Ocean as Sagar. This means the ocean and stands for security and growth for all in the region. In several ways, this approach signifies a secure, safe and sustainable model for development with positive ramification for the entire region. India has also been cooperating closely with a number of countries and has been at the forefront in the region to implement and harness the concept of the blue economy. We have vast maritime interests. We are fundamentally, the economic well-being of our country is fundamentally linked to the maritime domain. And the last decade or so, there is a clear shift in our focus towards issues maritime. You had Justice Gombar also mentioned the Sagarmala project, which has led to port-led development. We have 12 major ports and over 200 minor ports. More than 95% of our trade by volume and about 72% by value is carried by the sea. We are an energy deficient nation. We're almost 85% of our energy requirements in the form of crude oil, coal and gas comes by the sea. So the economic well-being of our country is fundamentally linked to our use of the ocean. We have a vibrant merchant marine, a very potent Indian Navy, which is the largest in the region. We have a thriving shipbuilding industry, which includes both private and government-owned or public sector shipyards. And I'm happy to state that over 50 ships and submarines on order of the Navy are all being built in India with growing indigenous content. The other sectors in the maritime domain which are stated for growth are the oil and gas exploration, marine-based renewable energy, deep-sea fishing. We are the second or the third largest producers of fish in the world. Marine and cruise tourism is growing. Development of our beautiful islands both in the Lakshadweep and the Andaman and Nicobar group. And the challenge is to ensure that we develop green infrastructure in a sustainable manner with optimal exploitation of our marine resources to ensure sustainable development and well-being of our seas and oceans. For any meaningful activity to be pursued, a secure and stable environment is required or is a prerequisite. Maintaining a safe and conducive environment for unhindered growth of the ocean-based economic activities would require sustained coordination effect by our Navy and different maritime or marine agencies. And the Navy has been at the forefront to secure the sea lines of communication. We have a huge cooperative network in the Indian Ocean region where, at their request, the Indian Navy carries out patrol of the exclusive economic zones of the island nations of Seychelles, Mauritius and Maldives. We have coordinated patrols and interaction in the Bay of Bengal with Bangladesh, Indonesia, Thailand, Malaysia. We have been growing bilateral exercises between Indian Navy and other navies have grown from just about 8 or 9 a decade ago to over 30. Every alternate year we have a Milan which used to be hosted in Port Blair to get like-minded navies together. Now it has grown in size, and this year, which is going to be held next month in March off the coast of Visakhapatnam, over 41 navies have been invited to participate in it. So the Indian Navy and India has been at the forefront to ensure that we have a safe and secure environment in the Indian Ocean. We've also gone about it's very important that we know what is happening on the surface of the ocean. That is called maritime domain awareness. And the Indian Navy has been at the forefront of ensuring that we gather this information, we make a comprehensive situational awareness or a picture of what is happening, who's where on the ocean, and share it with us. We have set up an international fusion center, and we have invited a number of countries to participate in that so that we have a common knowledge. About a decade ago, the Navy took an initiative and we set up an Indian Ocean Naval Symposium in 2008 to get like-minded littoral countries of the Indian Ocean on a common platform so that we can share initiatives, and there are 3 verticals. And the Indian Navy has been at the forefront of providing or being the first responders for national disasters and humanitarian, HADR as we call it. And we have been the first to reach wherever there has been help required. And the recent example of Madagascar and Mozambique is there. There are important issues which are going to be discussed today, and the speakers are going to make their presentation. And I am sure that the students and professionals attending the National Capacity Building Workshop will gain immensely. And I look forward to the rich and comprehensive discussions on all issues being covered. Thank you very much, and Jai Hind.
Life gives you an ocean of opportunities. If you live a life less ordinary, you can touch the sky with glory. This loving patron is a living example of the above, and he is among the pantheons of the armed forces that we have today. Thank you so much, sir, for briefing us about the inception, evolution, and the current condition of the maritime law today, also acknowledging the concept of blue economy, challenges, and the role of India in overcoming them. Thank you so much.
Next to honor us with his presence per se is the Vice Admiral Pradeep Chauhan. I would request everyone to kindly welcome our guest of honor to address the gathering.
Justice Neeru Chadha, Justice Meena Gombar, Admiral Sunil Lamba, Commander Chaudhary, Professor Kapoor, Dr. Patel, Dr. Sakhuja, Caroline, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. I am going to talk to you somewhat without a prepared set of papers because I want to start my conversation with you addressing a number of areas that I think are of seminal importance to the growth of the legal backup to our maritime endeavors. Admiral Sunil Lamba has only just expounded upon the many areas in which our nation is forging ahead and several areas in which the Indian Navy is at the forefront of these endeavors. I cannot stress to you adequately enough the need for our maritime endeavors to be provided with adequate legal and academic support. We are uniquely positioned as a country that in the next 100 years or so, in fact, in the next 200 years, India will either succeed as a nation or we will fail. And the determinant of success or failure will really be the ability, the adroitness, the skill with which we are able to dance upon the maritime domain, because as Justice Meena Gombar has already mentioned, this is going to be the century of the seas. And this century isn't going to end with the calendar year 2100, although I dare say the impact of climate change upon us will be a matter of seminal importance as we run into the 22nd century. Now, seated in the audience before me are two broad categories of people. Those who will look back upon this particular period with either delight or despair, and those of you who are younger and sitting from the fourth row onwards, who will determine whether we are delighted or we are filled with despair. You represent indeed the future of this great nation in its maritime endeavors, which you must remember have persisted over millennia. 3,000 years is almost 2,800 years longer than the United States of America has existed. And in that period, it has only been for a 440-year period of colonial interregnum that we have managed in our minds to split the Indian Ocean from the Pacific Ocean. Otherwise, this is one strategic whole. So let me start with a few points that I wanted to make. The most important one is really that what we need most urgently in India is evangelism. We need evangelists of the maritime domain. All too often, we have either speakers who speak like music system speakers. They have no idea what they are speaking. They're very good speakers, or we have people who are filled with knowledge and cannot articulate it to anybody else. Because language is completely ignored in our educational system. Most of us have grown up with the belief that language is a means of communication. This is rubbish. Language is a mode of thought. If you cannot articulate a complex concept to yourself, then you can hardly expect to articulate it to anybody else. Here, there is a remarkable coincidence between the legal profession and our maritime endeavor. The tools of lawyers are words. The syntax of those words either makes for a winning argument or destroys a winning argument. It is words, these words and the syntax with which they are used constitute evangelism for you. And yet in India, we are at a stage where we say things like, "Wo dena wo kya naam hai tera?" "Wo dena wo kya naam hai tera?" इसको कभी एनालाइज किया है? और इसके बावजूद भारतवर्ष में कुछ ना कुछ हो जाता है. Except that what happens may not be what you wanted to happen, the person who made it happen need not be the person you wanted to make happen, and so on and so forth. So terminological exactitude in India is a foundational flaw, which if we do not address today, will prevent us from actually seizing the high ground that we seek, morally, physically, both. Conceptual clarity emanates from linguistic awareness. Which language doesn't matter. It doesn't matter whether you think in your mind in one or another language. That's not relevant. It is relevant, however, that the language in which you think, that language should contain the lexicon of the words of the profession that you have chosen. Now you have chosen the profession of law. I rather doubt that anybody has held a gun to your head and said, "Come to Nimrana." They might have held a gun to your head to say, "Stay in Nimrana." But coming to embrace the strengths and the mysteries and the glories of the legal profession is a choice that you have made. Having made this choice, conceptual clarity becomes crucial for you. In the same way as we chose life at sea, we could have chosen to become Air Force officers like Wing Commander Chaudhary here, and we would have touched the skies with glory, I have no doubt, as he has done. But we chose the profession of the seas. In the profession of the seas for India, we are uniquely positioned. We must have a tree जिसकी जो जड़ें हैं वो हमारी परंपरा में, हमारी संस्कृति में गड़े हुए हैं. इसका तना जो है, the trunk, it must stand proud, free, rooted in India. But its flowers, its leaves, these must grow in an अंतर्राष्ट्रीय बगीचा, एक अंतर्राष्ट्रीय बगीचे में खेलनी चाहिए. So you are blessed twice over by being Indians. Dvibhashya, strong and idiomatic English, and ठोस और मुहावरेदार Hindi must be seamlessly embedded in you. We must not believe in a khichdi. I said, फिर मने ना, this cannot be the case. What we must be able to do is be strong in each of the languages that we have chosen. Now there are other languages that prevail in Europe, and if you aspire towards international maritime law, then languages of Europe, French, German, Spanish, need to be mastered by you. What about the fact that you think in your mind, ये क्या बोले जा रहा है? अंग्रेज तो चले गए, अभी अंग्रेजी ठोके जा रहे हैं. Aren't you thinking that? And yet, not one of you goes home and speaks in Latin, saying, Ave mater, quo vadis pater. Do you ever say anything like that? You don't. And yet, Latin will form a major part of how you will be able to work the typologies of the profession that you have chosen. Therefore, conceptual clarity is going to be crucial. If we suffer today from lack of conceptual clarity, then no matter what kind of edifice we build, how sophisticated it is, how marvelously we are able to articulate it, it will be that much rubbish. Just sophisticated rubbish, fluff. We have, in fact, in India, far too much fluff already. Let me give you some examples. Let's take the case that India is an independent, democratic, sovereign nation. Now the words independent, democratic, sovereign, and nation are all concepts. They reflect desired end states. In fact, a concept always reflects a desired end state. And this is given expression. Once it is articulated, then this articulation is through a statement of policy. So a concept which reflects a desired end state is given articulation through a statement of policy. And once that statement of policy has been expressed, it automatically identifies one or more interests. That these interests now need to be analyzed by each one of us so as to yield a set of objectives. And these objectives are sought to be achieved by formulating one or more strategy. And this is where strategy comes in. And these strategies must be capable of being implemented in times of peace, in times of tension, in times of conflict. And then these are implemented through, as I mentioned earlier, terminological exactitude. That terminological exactitude is determined by doctrine. And that doctrine must be capable of then promoting India's core national interest. And what is India's core national interest, ladies and gentlemen? The statement of our core national interest is derived from the Constitution of India, within which lies the directive principles of state policy. And the expression of our core national interest is the assurance of economic, material, and societal well-being for the people of India. This is our core national interest. Our maritime interests flow from and flow into this core national interest. Never forget that interests of India are India's interests. If we could magically erase China from the map of the earth, quite a pleasurable exercise actually. Even if you could do that, it would not affect one single maritime interest of India one whit. India's maritime interests are India's. They are not reactive. What does impact us is that in the pursuit of these interests, in the protection of these interests, other countries function as risk factors for us. And so it is important to be able to distinguish between risk and threat. Is China a threat to India? I don't know. But is China a risk to India? Most certainly. Is Sri Lanka a risk to India? Yep. Is India a risk to Bhutan? Yep. Every country affords a factor of risk. And as maritime powers, we must be able to factor this risk, which is not static, it is a dynamic feature. Many conferences I have attended across the world, many of them are sought deliberately to be dumbed down. And this irritates me more than anything else because it implies a degree of condescension कि हमारे में काबिलियत ही नहीं है, ये बहुत ऊंची ऊंची बातें, आप लोग बच्चे लोग हो, आप जैक एंड जिल सुन लो. And I look at them and say, no. And they tell you, I mean, without saying it in so many words, what are they saying? They're saying, अपनी औकात में रहो. अपनी औकात में रहो? How did you come to the conclusion that this was my औकात? How many of you feel that high-level intellectual debate is beyond your understanding, that you can only do saas and bahu ki kahaniyan? How many of you feel that way? Put your hands up and I will dumb this lecture down or this opening address down immediately. But if you don't feel that way, and I don't see any hands, and I'm assuming that you have understood the question well, that it implies that there is no need to dumb down anything, that our young people are more than capable of handling large conceptual issues, that we don't have to bring everything downwards, and our young people are represented by you. So I would like you in these seminars, in these workshops, in this engagement with the National Maritime Foundation, lift yourselves. Function at your normal, your natural level, which is high. Don't allow yourselves to be dumbed downwards. Don't allow this to happen. Function at your normal level. You are Indians. You are the brightest people on the planet Earth. And demonstrate this. When we talk about conceptual clarity, therefore, in spatial terms too, we must understand that the area that we're discussing our maritime issues in is at the most limited by the concept of the Indo-Pacific. And this Indo-Pacific is our strategic geography. What on earth is strategic geography? And how on earth does strategic geography differ from real geography? बड़ी मुश्किल से तो भूगोल से छुटकारा पाया, है ना? But still, if you want to work international maritime law, if you want to work national or admiralty law, then the world and its geographies will play out for you. You cannot ignore them. Strategic geography, real geography, differ like this. Take a map or a chart on which real geography is depicted. On that map or chart, if you were to lay out a certain series of latitude, longitudinal points and join these with a circle or an ellipse or any irregular shape that so forms, then the area that you enclose within it, if in that area you were to concentrate almost all the features of your grand strategy, then the area that you have enclosed is your strategic geography. Is India's strategic geography going to be the same as that of Tonga? No. Is Sri Lanka going to be the same as USA? No. Is India going to be the same as Pakistan? In no way. So therefore, for us, understanding strategic geography is crucial. In the presentations that we make later in the day, we will dwell upon this in determining what are the rights and what are the duties of states. Remember one more time that you are inheritors of a great, rich, and luxuriant maritime tradition. This is not necessarily only by those who are practicing or practitioners at sea. I have had the great privilege of commanding the Indian Navy's aircraft carrier. We are rounding Sri Lanka. My aircraft is in the air. It now says, I have an engine problem. The pilot says, Mayday, 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 I'm going down. Ditching. And we find that he has ditched right next to 11.3 miles away from Point de Gaulle in Sri Lanka. What should we do? Can we enter? Can we not enter? Can we start to debate? Can we start opening legal precedences? Can we go through case law? No, we don't have time. We have to do this now. I have to take a decision right now. Enter? Don't enter. And then I have to leave it to my government. Will you back me? The government says, well, I invested so much money in your training. Didn't they train you? When you come up as legal experts to us and interface with us, these and thousands of questions like these must come up like that. That means that the knowledge base that you have, the articulation capability that you possess, the evangelism with which you convince outside and inside parties is going to either determine success or we'll end up in some very bad situations. I want to tell you one or two more things. There is this relationship. What I've been trying to emphasize is the relationship between academia and policy making. It is a foolish nation that will allow its academic talent to be wasted away from its policy making. Is our policy making good? I think so. Could it be better? Most certainly. How could it be better? By pure academic support, continuous research. And this is what we hope to be able to achieve through the Memorandum of Understanding that the NMF was very proud to sign with Raffles University on the 12th of December last year when I first came and was mesmerized by this environment in which you are so happily living. People have spoken about the blue economy and Sagar Mala. I want to tell you about Sagar, which has also been alluded to by Admiral Lamba. We are in grave danger, ladies and gentlemen, of Sagar and Sagar Mala pulling in two different directions. Sagar says we are security and growth for all in the region. We are an inclusive concept. We tell Sri Lanka, you're part and parcel of our growth story. As you grow, we grow. We tell that to Bangladesh, and then we have Sagar Mala. And in Sagar Mala, we are saying, no, baby, it's only me. How can this be? How can we be pulling in two different directions simply because we have two different ministries controlling each of these? Who is bridging this gap? How is this gap to be bridged? What is the relationship, therefore, between policy and academia comes up again. When you take maritime impacts of climate change, and I think I will end with that, we have significant issues. Today, everybody talks about the Maldives. The Maldives will disappear, sea level will rise. Do you know that in 1950, the country that had the largest population which would be adversely impacted by sea level rise on the planet Earth was India. In 2100, the country with the largest population being impacted by sea level rise will be India. But let's talk about Maldives because it's uncomfortable to talk about India. Why is it uncomfortable? Not enough study, not enough research, not enough developed activity, not enough legal options, not enough quasi-legal options, not enough options. Why no options? Not enough maritime domain awareness, not only of the physical activities that are currently there, but what is going to happen. Let's talk about Maldives. Maldives has a population of about, my point exactly, Maldives has a population of about 370,000 people. Sea level rises. Suddenly we'll have 370,000 boat people. Where will they go? I don't know, maybe they'll go to Sri Lanka. Then where will the Sri Lankans go? Surely we have a problem. When the Maldives population disappears, and Maldives disappears with it, thanks to climate change induced sea level rise, the Maldives exists today, aaj to Maujood hai ki nahi? So it's got an exclusive economic zone around it. When the island disappears, what happens to the EEZ? What happened to the demarcation of that EEZ with the EEZ of India? Does India's EEZ automatically expand? Does it not expand? Whose EEZ is it? Does EEZ vanish? What happens? The issue is not for you to find answers. And that finding of answers is a major issue. The issue is, at least let us debate the questions. And the questions are not being debated. And therefore, this partnership between the National Maritime Foundation and Raffles University, and within Raffles University, this Center for International Maritime Law is either going to be an example that will catalyze India into greatness, or we will all have to bear the opprobriums of failure, and we cannot afford that. So I've had many chats with Justice Gomber. We have many ideas that we will explore over the next coming days. But one thing that we are united upon continuously is that this relationship has not come one moment too soon. Let us therefore build upon it. Do not take these workshops lightly. Do not say, actually, no, I wanted to use my mobile to abhi karta hu. These workshops will put forward issues before you that you will need to wrestle with. You will need to lift yourself, as I said, to your natural state. Your natural state is that of excellence. And I hope that in the day today, we will see much more evidence of it to the delight and encouragement of one and all. Thank you very much.
I quote, "Language is a mode of thought," I end quote. Thank you, sir, for making us realize the importance of terminological exactitude and evangelism. And indeed, we are proud to be Indians above all and love the diversity with which we live, but with core national interest. We recognize the dangers of contradiction of policies and acknowledge that how only academicians can overcome it. Thank you so much, sir.
Now we have the moment we have all been waiting for. Next to show us with her blessings is the chief guest for today, Dr. Neeru Chadha, Judge, International Tribunal for the Law of the Sea. So I request everyone to kindly welcome her with a big round of applause.
Vice Admiral Chauhan, Professor Patel, Wing Commander Chaudhary, Professor Kapoor, esteemed resource persons and participants of this workshop. I am very happy to attend this workshop as one of its keynote speakers. I am grateful to the Raffles University for this kind of invitation. The law of the sea, as you all are aware, has developed over several centuries, concluding in the 1982 United Nations Convention on Law of the Sea and related instruments. Though the convention addresses and governs all aspects of ocean space, from the allocation of jurisdiction in various zones, the equitable and efficient utilization of marine resources, and the study, protection and preservation of marine environment, to delimitation of maritime boundaries, scientific research, and settlement of international disputes, the focus of my remarks today is on the diverse threats to the health of the oceans. Oceans not only connect us, but they also sustain us. The resources and uses of oceans are fundamental to human well-being and development. It is important to recall that while nearly half of the world's human population lives within 50 miles of a coast, all of us depend on the oceans and resources it provides. Whether it be for the food we eat or oxygen we breathe. It is estimated that more than 3.5 billion people depend on the ocean for their primary source of food, the fish. Oceans not only produce half of the world's oxygen, but also serve as an air filtering device, absorbing nearly 1/3 of human-caused carbon dioxide emissions. The oceans also play a major role in the freshwater cycle. As we have been told, ocean-bound shipping accounts for about 90% of global trade. The ocean lies at the heart of the global telecommunication system, hosting around 1 million kilometers of fiber optic cables that carry more than 98% of international internet, data, video, and telephonic traffic. Ocean-related industries such as transportation, fishing, and tourism provide jobs and revenue to the states. The deep sea realm also has immense economic potential in the form of minerals, energy, and living resources. It does not therefore need any iteration that the long-term sustainability of oceans is critical, and any change that alters the state of the oceans can have serious socio-economic consequences. Therefore, there is an urgent and continuing need to address the conservation and sustainable use of the oceans in areas within our national jurisdictions and also in areas beyond national jurisdictions. Goal 14 of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development highlights the conservation and sustainable use of the ocean as one of the world's most pressing global sustainability challenges. It calls upon members of the United Nations to enhance the conservation and sustainable use of the oceans and their resources by implementing international law as reflected in the United Nations Convention on Law of the Sea, which provides a legal framework for the conservation and sustainable use of oceans and its resources. We have heard that states and other stakeholders attach great importance to the development and expansion of ocean-based economy. The oft-mentioned term blue economy refers to the sustainable use of ocean resources for economic growth, improved livelihoods and jobs, while at the same time preserving the health of the ocean ecosystems. By the middle of the century, the world population is expected to have increased to 10 billion people. This means that we must continue to look at the oceans in order to ensure sufficient food, jobs, energy and economic growth. But this will be possible only if ocean resources are extracted sustainably. The oceans are exposed to various deleterious human-induced changes that go well beyond oft-repeated IUU fishing, overfishing, transport of invasive species, and oil pollution from ships. The most immediate and pressing risk to the ocean, as mentioned by Justice Chauhan, Admiral Chauhan, arises from climate change. So I'm used to referring to the justices, so sorry for the mistake. The oceans have a critical role in regulating the Earth's climate as they absorb the extra energy trapped in the climate system, as well as a large amount of carbon dioxides that we emit into the atmosphere. As a consequence of increase in greenhouse gas emissions, the oceans are warming and expanding. Their chemical composition is changing, leading to sea level rise, ocean acidification, and adverse impact on the marine ecosystem and biodiversity. Sea level rise is expected to be one of the most serious consequences of the climate change, posing a risk to all coastal states. The effect of sea level rise could range from erosion of coastlines, could
range from erosion of coastlines to loss of territory for some low-lying states. Maldives was just mentioned. And in some extreme climate change contingencies, for some states, most or all of their territory could be inundated or it could disappear. Moreover, even before total submergence were to happen, population displacement due to gradual loss of habitability may happen, as islands may become unable to sustain a permanent population. Here, apart from humanitarian issues, other questions of international law of statehood, sovereignty, and entitlements, human rights, refugee law, and access to resources, as well as broader issues of international peace and security may also arise. Ocean warming and acidification associated with global warming of 1.5 degrees Celsius is projected to have an adverse impact on a wide range of marine organisms and ecosystems, as well as food production centers such as aquaculture and fisheries, and consequently on many coastal communities that depend on oceans and their resources. In this regard, while the impact on the small island developing states has been more in focus, as many of them would have an existential problem, the impact on countries like India, which have a long coastline, would also be severe. It is estimated that sea level rise for coasts of India may range from 3.5 to 34.6 inches between 1990 and 2100, which may result in saline coastal groundwater, endangering wetlands, inundating valuable land, and adversely affecting coastal communities. From the law of the sea perspective, the sea level rise will have a direct impact on baselines that may retreat. This will impact the breadth of the maritime zones, because the extent of maritime zones is determined from these baselines. For many coastal states, these shifting baselines may not only result in loss of entitlement to maritime zones, but a loss of critical maritime area as the outer limits will move landwards. For some island states, it could radically reduce or eliminate entirely their maritime entitlements. Moreover, some maritime zones could recede during a time when the value of the resources of those zones will be increasing, causing huge economic consequences for coastal states. Shifting baselines will also change maritime boundaries, create uncertainty, and hence increase the likelihood of interstate disputes. The response of the international community, individually and collectively, to the global climate change has been both to seek to prevent such change and also to prepare to adapt to the changes that are likely to occur despite such prevention efforts. Similarly, from the legal perspective, for addressing the consequences of sea level rise on the law of the sea, apart from mitigation measures, it has to be seen whether it is essential to find a legal adaptation response. The Law of the Sea Convention assumed that the sea level and the low water mark were relatively constant features. It is now realized that it may not always be the case. Several proposals have been made by experts to address this potential threat. In this regard, some experts suggest freezing of baselines and maritime zones as notified. This, it is argued, would promote the achievement of the objectives of the Law of the Sea Convention of maintenance of peace, stability, fairness, and efficiency in ocean governance. Others argue that this would go against the founding principle of the Law of the Sea, that land dominates the sea. As you are aware, all maritime entitlements derived from sovereignty over land. As they think that coastal states will gain extended zones and high seas will be reduced to the disadvantage of other states. UNCLOS, or the Law of the Sea Convention, does not expressly address the issue of shifting or moving nature of baselines. However, it does provide for two situations where maritime zone limits are permanently fixed, namely for the establishment of an extended continental shelf under Article 6, Paragraph 8, and for the establishment of straight baselines in highly unstable delta situations under Article 7, Paragraph 2. Since I refer to the blue economy, I'll highlight another challenge which may confront the law of the sea. That is the possibility of imminent exploitation of the seabed for mineral resources and its impact on marine environment. When the convention was adopted in 1982, mining of deep seabed manganese nodules and other minerals was seen as an important new economic opportunity. Hence, Part 11 of the convention contains an elaborate governance structure under the International Seabed Authority for prospecting and exploring seabed mineral resources. For several decades, despite the initial interest, there has not been much progress towards exploitation of seabed minerals. First, because of lack of extractive technology, and second, because onshore production has been capable of satisfying the market demand.